What's up everyone? John Brent from Techno Buffalo here with a full review for you of the latest flagship from HTC. This is the brand new HTC One M8. I've been using it for quite a while and I'm ready to share my thoughts and help you guys decide whether or not it belongs in your pocket for the next 2 years. Let's go ahead and get started. As I do with all my reviews, I want to give a disclaimer. I use this as my daily driver for 9.5 days. Most of my time was with the International Edition, although I did test using an AT&T model as well. The International one is tested using an AT&T SIM card here in Southern California. Todd Hazelton, who wrote the written portion of the review, if you want more detail on anything I'm talking about, hit the link down below to go check that out. Let's jump right in with call quality. It's always how I start my reviews. Especially when you're dealing with a metal phone, be a bit of worry that maybe antennas aren't going to work so well, you're holding the phone wrong, for example. No issues at all with call quality. Again, tested with AT&T's network in Southern California, so your results might vary, but no drop calls at all. Call quality is absolutely awesome. Call quality on the new HTC One is as good, if not better, than the last generation, which is to say, it's pretty baller. Alright, so for this review, I'm going to break it down into 6 categories that I think are going to cover the most salient points for the majority of consumers looking to pick the sucker up. We're going to talk about design, software, screen, camera, performance, and intangibles. Obviously, there are a ton more we could talk about, but I think those 6 can best sum up a phone. So I'm going to give you guys a quick spec refresh in case you forgot what's packed inside of this tiny little body. It's a 5-inch screen, 1920 by 1080. If you could do quick math, it's a 441 ppi. Protecting it is a Corning Gorilla Glass 3. Powering it is a 2.3 gigahertz, pretty beastly Snapdragon 801 processor. Although if you're in Asia, that'll be bumped up to 2.5 gigahertz. 2 gigs of RAM, either 16 or 32 gigs. Now has expandable storage up to 128. On the back, we'll talk a lot about this. The Duo camera of HTC's 4 ultra-pixel camera. On the front is a 5 megapixel wide-angle lens, 802.11 A, B, G, and AC at 2.4 and 5 gigahertz. 2600 milliamp hour battery, NFC, and available in a few colors: gunmetal gray, glacier silver, and amber gold. Now, with all that out of the way, let's finally jump into the review. Let's start with design. I think HTC has some of the best designs for flagships in the industry. Their build quality matches Nokia and Apple, and that's some seriously lofty praise. The design of the original HTC One is classic. Cold metal, gently rounded edges, industrial feel, great display, amazing speakers, all made for a phone that felt really good in the hand. The One M8 is an evolution of that design, and that's not half bad. It's got 20% more metal. They act as a plastic ring around the outside of it, making the aluminum now wrap around the edges. The result is exquisite, if not a bit slippery. I think some sort of texture would have really helped. I haven't dropped the phone yet, but I definitely feel like I could very, very soon. I wasn't a big fan of the power button on the original. It felt small and kind of hard to depress. HTC fixed that on the M8, making it bigger and way easier to find blindly with your finger, like this. The larger screen size make it look a bit more rectangular, but the rounded edges, make it look, if you traced it, very much like a galaxy. There's a theme here with the phone. The original HTC One felt good. This one feels better. Virtually everything over the original HTC One or M7 is improved here. The biggest improvement for me, though, I think, is the death of the really, really bad capacitive buttons on the original HTC One. I'm usually a big fan of actual buttons. I've talked about it in future videos, but the odd placement on either side of the HTC logo, coupled with the logo not serving as an actual button, was absolutely maddening. Now we've got actual, honest, on-screen buttons, and I know a few of you were concerned they take up too much space on the bottom. That's usually my issue with on-screen buttons, but suffice it to say, it's way better than the alternative that we had on the original. The moral here, though, is that it's one of the best, if not the best, design phones on the market. Alright, so next let's talk about software. So it's no secret HTC is really squarely up against Samsung, particularly the Galaxy S5, in this generation of phones. I think Samsung takes the approach of they'll throw a ton of new features at you and hope there's maybe 1 or 2 or 3 that you really like. I think HTC takes a different approach. They really use features I think they feel that you're going to use the most, and everything else is kind of secondary. And the best thing I can say about Sense 6 is it kind of gets out of its own way without making your experience all about Sense features. They're there when you need them or want them. Blink feed's been improved. You can now allow for feeds for virtually any topic, including, and I'm just saying, tech and Techno Buffalo specifically. Just throwing that out there. Arguably the best feature of Blink feed, though, now is that it can be turned off if you don't want it, and not just exiled to a home screen you don't actually use all that often. I will say, though, Blink feed's kind of a nice little time waster and does work as advertised. So I like a unified inbox, so I rarely use Gmail on Android. I'm usually on K9 or another third-party email app. I think HTC's default email client is actually one of the most elegant options out there. For as much time as I use email, this is really, really important to me. Sense 6 also brought motion controls, ways to open the camera app just by moving the screen in conjunction with how you pick it up. The most useful of which, though, is when you answer a call, you just pick it up, put it to your ear, and it answers it. It's neat, and it works. Most of the other motion controls I didn't really use, except for one that seems heavily influenced by LG's, and that's the knock feature. Double tap the screen to wake it up, super useful, works great. At least in our international unit. On the AT&T model we were using, it only worked about 70% of the time. If you don't like that home button placement, again, you don't have to use it, just double tap the screen. Sense 6 is the nicest skin or custom UI out there, hands down. It's definitely an evolution over 5, but a really welcome change. Let's go from software to screen. The screen here is pretty standard 1080 stuff. There's nothing revolutionary, just a beautiful functional screen. For those M7 owners who had a weird tint with kind of a bluish color, there's no such tint here at all on the new HTC One M8. Outdoor visibility, sometimes an issue, is also pretty much improved, but you still need to turn the brightness all the way up to see it, but you will be able to see it. The jump to a 5-inch screen I think served the phone very well. Video, games, and text all look awesome. But this day and age, it's kind of harder to find a really bad screen than a good one. So screen's pretty decent and works well on the new HTC One. Next, let's jump into camera. All right, let's just get the big elephant in the room out of the way here, the duo camera on the back. HTC did a really awesome job with the 4-megapixel branded ultra-pixel camera on the original HTC One or M7. The biggest complaint a lot of users had, however, was that it didn't perform that well in really bright light situations. That the photos were of such low resolution that you couldn't actually zoom in and crop the photo. HTC tried to address one of those issues this time around, but also ignored the other one completely. Still, it even added more functions though. So the camera is much better in bright light situations, but it's still not perfect, and that's because HTC said it chose a better sensor this time around. Also, the phone autofocus and snaps photos really fast, 0.3 seconds, so you can set off rapid-fire pictures much quicker than before. As for the megapixel count though, you're still stuck with only 4 megapixels to work with, and that means zooming and cropping still yields crummy photos. I don't care if they call it mega or ultra pixels, still not going to be able to do much with the zooming there. Secondary duo camera lens is capable of pulling in all the depth data on a photo. So the HTC One M8 knows what objects are in the foreground and the background. It can then use that information to blur out photos and add sort of the bokeh effect that you see usually find in DSLRs. So the feature called defocus is not perfect, but it does work better than other phones that have attempted this in the past, like the Xperia Z1s or Nokia's Refocus app. HTC is also touting the smart dual LED flash. It works well, it's really solid. Instead of just blowing out subject with bright light, it adjusts itself to make sure the skin tones and other colors still look accurate. We first saw this tech used on the iPhone 5S and works really well here on the HTC One M8 too. The camera UI is still super fluid and easy to use, but HTC removed the Zoe function from the default app and put it in another setting. That's because the depth camera doesn't really work with Zoe's. If you open the Zoe camera, however, you can still record Zoe, snap photos, and even record longer videos. You can even pause the video and then resume filming right where you left off. Again though, photos snapped in this mode don't have depth data. It seems silly, but that's just how an sensor works. HTC is going to release a new Zoe app to allow people to collaborate and create multi-user highlight reels, and I can't wait for its launch, though it's not out yet, however, so I can't talk about it. Finally though, the selfie guy, the front-facing camera on the front works really well, and I love the wide-angle aspect HTC put from earlier handsets like the One M7 and the Butterfly. Images are far better too because it shoots 5 megapixels this time around instead of 2 megapixel shots on the previous generation. So overall though, if you're chasing megapixels, then look for another phone. The HTC One M8 still takes great shots, and I've really enjoyed performance of the camera, save for some of the lower res shots. Also, lack of optical image stabilization might be an issue for some folks, but for me, once you pictures of my kids are out and about, the camera works really well and performed pretty awesomely. Next, let's jump into performance. Listen, it's fast. Between the Snapdragon 801, 2 gigabytes of RAM, anything from multitasking to games will be super easy. The best thing I can say about the power here is that I never noticed it, which is to say I was never aware of any slowdown. And for me, a phone that gets out of its own way and lets me do what I want to do without sort of slowing down is sort of worth a spot in my pocket. But because I do like to give a quadrant score, I know it's not always the best way to score a phone, but I do use it through all my phones, so it's sort of a constant there. Got a pretty beastly score of 22,500. So yeah, really fast phone. Next, let's jump to intangibles. So I was really worried about battery life. 2600 milliamp hours is not huge. I will say though, HTC did a killer job managing battery. I test pretty much every Android phone I use. With my usage, I'm usually around 30 to 40% by end of the day. With this one, I was close to 50 to 60%, which is absolutely incredible. And I take my phone off the charger usually around 6:30. I've got about maybe 4 hours of phone calls. Usually it's on Wi-Fi at the office or the house. It goes back on the charger around 11 o'clock. I've got maybe 20 or 30 minutes of video watching, some games on there, heavy social media, 2 email apps pulling in every 5 minutes, so a lot of usage. So that's really impressive. HTC did a really good job on battery life. They also added battery savings mode that actually shuts down auxiliary functions and vastly increases battery life even more if you get down to that dreaded 5-10% level. They also listened to consumers and added a micro SD card slot, which for some might be a reason just alone to upgrade. And of course, those killer front-facing speakers, they lost the Beats logo on the back, but they added extra 20% on sound. And I wish I could show you or let you hear what the sound sounds like coming out of this, but it's not going to translate over video into your speakers. But it sounds really, really good. If you thought the speakers on the original HTC One sounded awesome, these sound even better, and that's saying a lot. All right, so let's finally break this down. What's the final score on the new HTC One M8? It gets a really, really solid 9. I love this phone, and I would happily sign a 2-year deal for it, which is not something I say very often. It's a perfect example of skinned Android at its best. If you're looking at the best Android phone on the market right now, this is absolutely the best one to pick up. If you can compare this with the Nexus 5, I think you're going to get a really, really solid device. And of course, a Galaxy S5 is coming very soon, so competition is going to get fierce. But worry not if you want to pick up HTC's latest. It's going to serve you well for the next year and beyond. Thank you guys for watching. Hope you enjoyed. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave it in the comments right down below. Please give the video a thumbs up. We always appreciate it. Of course, check us out at techknowinbuffalo.com for the latest and greatest tech news. And again, if you want to see Todd's full written review that goes into more detail, link to that is going to be right down below. Bye-bye. What's up, everyone? Thank you for watching that video. If you want to see more of the latest and greatest tech news, you can subscribe to our main Tech Know Buffalo channel by clicking the button right down below in my pants region, or click on the buttons to your right to see more videos.